If you're a business owner or senior manager, you probably had more than enough about all the wonderful opportunities awaiting you in the era of digitalization.
Whether it is big data, cloud, data science, or whatever buzzword is currently trendy.
If you would like to hear someone dissecting these claims and showing you what it actually takes to improve business processes, you're in the right place.
This is Between Data and Risk, where we discuss real-life examples of what works and what doesn't in the world of business operations.
Hi, I'm your friendly neighborhood data guy, Dr. Marian Siwiak, and with me is my co-host, Artur Guja, Cognition Shared Solutions Chief Risk and Strategy Officer.
Hello.
Welcome to the 11th episode of Between Data and Risk. Today, we will be talking about the difference between education and knowledge transfer. We are excited to have with us today our guest, Dr. Susan Taffer, university professor, an American business and social entrepreneur, a transition strategist, as well as a president of innovative EdTech College for World Connection and the principal founder of World Connections Foundation, who agreed to share some of her experiences with us. Hello, Susan.
Greetings. Hello, gentlemen. Artur, Marian, nice to see you.
We are really honored that you accepted our invitation to join us and talk to our audience about education, knowledge, and how to become a smarter person, better equipped to deal with challenges of today's world. So my first question, as I mentioned in the intro, is do you perceive a difference between education and knowledge transfer? To be honest, we had a little behind-the-scenes discussion with Artur, and we differ a little in our perception of this topic. So how would you describe education in the context, especially of knowledge transfer required to keep the companies running?
Certainly, it's a great question. First of all, I think that they're very closely related, and you almost cannot have one without the other, but they do differ. And how they differ depends on how you apply what you know. And, knowledge transfer in and of itself is a very simple process of gaining information and either applying it or not, but is it synthesized? Because when we receive a lot of knowledge, a lot of data, a lot of information all at once, what does it mean? How do we apply that? That's the gift of the process of education. Not that education as it's formally presented is the answer to all things. It's not. But what you learn in the process of education and in higher education, advanced education, is how to approach synthesizing information to relate it to a specific problem. And so that's the skill that you develop. It's not necessarily a secret, but it's an exercise, and it's really working the muscle of the brain in how to take all that information in, make it meaningful to the problem at hand. Because it just depends on the lens that we approach the problem through. Like, there are many theories to approach a simple problem, many different ways to look at a specific issue. I always use the example of if you're looking at a tree and you're standing around a tree relatively circular, how many degrees of whole perceptions could that be from each individual? Well, if we look at math, it's 360. And additionally, if you're inside the tree trunk looking around, there's another 360 degrees. So that's 720 degrees of perception looking at a single problem. So how do you synthesize all that you have learned? It's not an easy task. It takes working the muscle of the brain is what I call it. So I hope that answered your question in a little bit more detail. Do I have a preference of one over the other? I don't think I really do, because again, you can have one without the other.
It's interesting because we spoke a couple episodes ago to Dr. Nick Swain, who is the president of North Idaho College, and we spoke to him about his approach and some of the programs that he's running, and he mentioned that his students are seen as very valuable and are being specifically asked for because they instead of just having the kind of the facts. They know how to apply them. They have the practical experience. So for me personally, it all starts with giving the data, the information, obviously. But as you say, the synthesis is putting it together, putting it into practice, and having that behind your belt is probably the key. But how do you actually achieve this? Because I've trained quite a few people in business situations. And sometimes you can bring the horse to water, but you just cannot make it drink. How do you achieve that effect?
Well, I think first of all, part of it is intuitive, and I can't deny that that's a gift of good teaching, is that sensibility of being intuitive, to be able to see where a person is coming from and where they're really creating their own blocks. And that's a lot of what it is they're resistant to whatever it is you're informing them on or helping them see. And a lot of it is the mind that thinks it knows. And that is a specific art, is to be able to talk to someone and help them understand that maybe they don't have that answer. And maybe the answer is organic. It's something that evolves out of the process of thinking and applying yourself to that particular situation. And so that's really something that takes practice and time when you're training people, how to weed that out. And there are specific exercises you can work with, and humor is a great way to introduce the thought of, great minds, and talk about the great minds in history. They didn't have all the answers, and they never approached a problem thinking they had the answer. They approached the problem as, what exactly could the answers be, and how many ways do I need to look at this to sift that out? And that takes more of a personal development piece than anything to do with, quote unquote, a knowledge absorption. It's dealing with, for lack of a better word, the ego of an individual, to allow that to be honored, but move it aside and say, hey, let's set this aside. Let's really look at this in a different way. And I use videos. I have a great video that talks about being humble with your intellect, and allowing your intellect to be wrong. And it's a great gift that you can give yourself. And so those kinds of tools sort of set the stage for the capacity for individuals to open up and really expand their own mind or their own approach.
This is really interesting. You touch upon so many things that we spoke previously. One thing that Dr. Swain was very adamant on is to allow people to fail as a way of helping them learn and grow in learning. And his exact words, that his people were really perceived as the ones who know how to troubleshoot, how to effectively get to the solution. So it was literally, that's what he said about the value of graduates that he is letting out to the world. The other thing that you mentioned is ego. We had a whole episode where we were discussing the role of ego in development in business environment, and should or should not it be banned. I'm really interested. How do you understand this process of setting? Because I have this saying that I am so arrogant that I have no problem with others being great and let me help me grow, and I don't need to prove anything anymore. I just want to learn and become even awesomer, even if such word doesn't exist. So what's your take on ego? You touched on the topic that we really heatedly discussed.
We disagreed on it quite heavily.
Well, that's expected, I'm sure. I love your question, Marian. And to me, I could go so many directions with the answer to this question. I feel that the ego is a very valuable part of who we are. The ego is something we need to have a relationship with. And as you mentioned, you said arrogance. Well, we think in often terms of arrogant being a negative connotation. And I look at the root of the word arrogant, and it means to take for one's own. And that's what the ego is about, to really take the world around it and bring it into being and make meaning to that individual about how to approach life and how to be best at life and whatever the drivers are. So I always honor the ego. It has its place, but I believe it needs to be integrated into the whole person and not the first voice that we hear. So there's a lot of practices out there which want to diminish the ego, make it disappear, or it's a bad thing. And I simply don't agree. It's a very valuable piece of who we are, and to know where it comes from and to know when it's speaking. That's the trick. To know when the ego is speaking is important. And sometimes that ego speaking is valuable because our ego will say, I'm not going to be defeated at this. Though I may fail many times, I won't be defeated. And so that's the difference. It's the persistence. And I share with my learners in the doctoral program that it's the passion that will get them through this 5 years of deep diving into a research topic. It's the passion that will get them through, but the passion is neither knowledge nor truth. And so the passion comes with the ego. The ego marries with the passion that drives us. And that's to be set aside. Knowledge and truth are discovered. And that's the journey that they're on. And to be willing to set that passion as the driver aside to learn the truth or to learn a truth. So that's the essence of research, I feel. So I hope I've responded to the concept of ego in a succinct way, because we could spend hours and hours on that topic, I think.
So the other topic that you already mentioned, and we disagreed just recently in our last episode, is related to connecting something that in domain-driven in design thinking is described in two separate steps, which I consider a bit strange, and Arthur is a big fan of, is disconnecting understanding from empathizing or observing. And I wonder what's your, in my personal opinion, disconnecting these two is a bit misleading. It should be one step of understanding where we connect both intellectual preparation and intellectual absorbing knowledge about the problem with deep perception of, because we are talking about understanding problems. So the perception of problems and empathizing with this emotional or I don't know, not so purely intellectual part of the problem. It should be, in my opinion, it's a process of learning about the problem. These two things are not identical, but they shouldn't be sequential. They should be parallel. But of course, feel free to correct me. That's just my take on things. So how do you perceive this mind and emotions, or facts and emotions connected to the problem and learning about the problem? How do you connect these, or disconnect?
Or disconnect, sure. Well, we approach it differently when we're speaking to a personal problem and a problem of analytics that's outside in the world at large. I think the best leaders blend the two. They bring their authentic self from their personal life into the world of work or the world of problems where we're solving and looking for solutions. So in research, we speak a lot about objectivism, being objective, being clean with our observations without imparting our own biases. Well, first of all, we all have biases. I mean, everybody likes their coffee just a little bit different in the morning, or maybe at night, or their tea, or whatever. So if you just take that simple application, it's a bias. preference. So no matter how we try to be fully, completely objective, we can't be. So what I like to help my learners and my clients understand is how to bring the best of ourselves to the problem. And yes, we understand when we're looking at it through a personal observation as opposed to a completely objective observation. And I don't think that one needs to be superior over the other because we've lived life, we have wisdom, we have experiences, we have our own individual knowledge through what we've studied. That's why we have different people come from different disciplines to lead an organization. Not all MBAs have it all together, right? So we need to shake that up a little bit, bring a philosopher in there. One of the things that I always want to share with people is that modern education has sort of beat out the sensibility of being creative. And to our point that we just discussed earlier, that the inability to allow ourselves to fail. We're so busy being right all the time that we don't exercise that fun, creative sense of like coloring outside the lines, so to speak. And I remember how mortified I was when my teacher in the second grade said, well, Cindy did it better because she stayed within the lines. I loved my colors. They were exciting. They were vibrant. They were deep. They were all over the page. So that being said, I remember I was being crushed by that, if I remember that feeling. So not to say that creativity doesn't have a place in pure analytics, because it does, actually. If you look at Einstein's work, how creative could you be, right? It's a marriage of the two, because the intellect runs on neurological energy, and our heart, our emotions that connect to who we are as individual and give us own individual meaning. It has its own rhythm. And yes, they are parallel. So how can you not consider the application of an individual's emotive self onto a certain problem, but to be able to have the discernment and to knowing when is it coming from the intuitive self or that emotion that applies to it, and when is it coming from the pure analytics, because there's a place for both.
And in design thinking, we had a huge discussion. I'm a fan of design thinking. Marian doesn't seem to be, and but for me, it follows the kind of logical steps of what we do with our clients. We don't go to the clients first to observe what they do and then start finding out what it all means. But we first prepare ourselves, like we did for this interview. We first researched, a lot of topics about education, about knowledge transfer, and then we came to observe. So for me, the sequence there, even though there's a big overlap, the intellectual preparation does enable you to observe in a meaningful way. And I think there is it doesn't necessarily end. The understanding doesn't end when you start observing. But I really like the way you presented that. There are biases, and the observing stage of design thinking is specifically there to break down those biases and find out where your understanding has introduced them, so that when you observe your client or the person who has a particular problem you're trying to solve, how they perceive it, what they're actually doing, so that you can filter them off.
I only meant that it doesn't mean that when you start observing, your understanding phase is done. Observing is an element of understanding. Disconnecting these two and putting them one after another is a mistake. You need to do some intellectual preparatory work. Then you do observing and you deepen your understanding. It's not like you're done with your understanding. As I told you, I'm not talking about the approach of design thinking. What I'm really discussing is the verbiage and some dangerous, borders that it introduces in the description, which may lead to misconceptions. The observation and this putting empathy on it, for me, is an integral part. Yes, we do very similarly. What I'm opposing is this sharp division and putting it like one step after another. Understanding, observation. No, your observation is just as element of our, but it's not the topic of this podcast. We had this one previously.
We can have another one where we disagree even more. But Susan, you mentioned something very interesting. You mentioned your kind of educational work with your students in academic setting, and you also mentioned your clients, your business setting. Mm-hmm. How do you see any differences between the way people are educated in academic settings versus the business? Because for me, business is always very, very result oriented, and as you said, you mentioned this once already. There's pressure on being always right. Mm-hmm. In HSBC, in my last job, we actually had the whole kind of innovation courses about allowing yourself to be wrong, mm-hmm. Allowing yourself to explore. But I think a lot of it was kind of lip service and trying to introduce some concepts which then didn't translate into actual everyday business practice. So how do you see the differences, and how would you improve it?
Arthur, you're very right, because when you're dealing in business and finding solutions, there's always a time constraint, right? And there's always the pressure of time is money. And it's about, finding solutions that help to resolve issues that prevent you from, making the right amount of money that everyone's happy with, or getting a new product on board, or whatever the case may be. So it's a bit impossible to play in the sandbox forever, right, when you're speaking in business concepts. But to your question, how does education differ from the business environment? And it depends on the institution. So there are institutions that provide really strong, what I would say, practitioner degrees and pathways where the businesses in the community or in the environment that they're related with contribute highly to the curriculum. And that's an important factor. We miss that sometimes in our traditional education system, especially in the United States, where we're driving education to feed education and to create academics. And academics is a business, whether we like it or not. And the business of being an academic is, for some, mostly those at the very, very top, it's profitable. So how do we drive that business? Sometimes not to the best of our constituents and those who we would like to serve, and that's the businesses and the individual contributors and entrepreneurs, you might say. So those institutions that know how to partner well with their communities and their stakeholders, they do a really good job of managing the knowledge base, the exercise of learning, and how to apply that in real business situations. So I take advantage of my university that I teach doctorate programs in. And yes, I fit the box. It's required, but I go way beyond that box. And students appreciate that. They really gravitate. I've had situations where I've had a small group and it got larger and larger, and suddenly I realized that there was no one else in any other classroom but mine, because we had a really great topic going and it was around math, believe it or not. No, they were younger, early 20s, but nonetheless, it's making learning fun and truly applicable. And I'm all for the marriage of business and education. Business is sort of a broad term, but I hope you understand my meaning, where constituents and stakeholders have a voice and can contribute to how that educational pathway moves. Because I get doctoral learners that they're not great academics when I first get them, but they are brilliant in their industry. And, I will have a VP of nonprofit healthcare system. And brilliant in his industry, writes differently than an academic dissertation. So, has to learn a new skill. Is he less brilliant? Absolutely not. It's just learning that skill of getting that research topic formulated so it gets through the academic pipeline And then he becomes, in and among that circle that puts him into the top C-suite category. So
I have a question which relates to that. Like, if, from your experience in both worlds, like we try to be practical and we want to give our audience some tips and tricks, so to speak. One good lesson about learning from academia, which you would love to see in most of the enterprises that you talk to. So, one habit, I don't know, one methodology framework or whatever it is, like, what is the biggest lesson that you think that business world could take from the educational world to work better, to in any sense? You can start with explaining what, except maybe more profitable, what does it mean to work better? It's also my personal interest. Like, what value can business have outside profit? But the one thing that you think should be transferred, knowledge transfer from academia to business.
Well, absolutely. I think the one thing that is the most beneficial for individuals that go through the process of advanced learning. There are many people that do well in show me how to get my A. I take the course, I take the class, I know what the rubric is, I know how to get my A, very highly motivated people, right? So the shift moves out of that environment into the educational world where you become self-motivated and you're self-directed with the guidance of a mentor, a chair, a committee. And that is sometimes a huge learning curve for people to understand and grasp, because there's no longer this formula for getting the A. There's this whole free world of exploration. And how do I direct myself to achieve that high level of expectation from myself and from those around me who are mentoring through the process? So what I'm getting at is a small bit of small phrase that is being self-motivated and self-directed. And that is something that if we transfer to the business world in leadership capacity, it's no longer about the technicalities of how to get the A or how to achieve a certain level of business success, but how do we grow better as a person, as an individual, and not just smarter, but grow better? And how do we apply ourselves and become more relatable to that culture of business and those people around us? Because in the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right?
It's interesting because we work sometimes with startups or with small companies, and we find that the problem is sometimes kind of almost the reverse. That you have a founding team, small founding team. It can be one person, it can be two or three, that is highly motivated. They are experts in their field. They have the big idea that they want to implement to improve the world, and they fare great until the point where they start taking on more people, and they start hiring, and then they find themselves facing a problem because suddenly they can't hire people as intelligent or as knowledgeable as themselves. They have to dip into the workforce and find someone who will actually be not the thinker, not the strategist, but the doer. They need someone for the process, but they find it very hard very often to transfer that knowledge, even on the simplest level, which leads to the cycle of frustration. Okay, you can't do it, and I will do it myself. Then they do it themselves, which leaves the person frustrated because they weren't given the kind of the chance to learn, and very often it leads to downright failure of the whole enterprise. So it's also the question is maybe not how to make people better learners, but how to make these founders better educators.
I love that. And it's so true. I've experienced it. I teach all the time, but I feel that frustration when people around me aren't as motivated as I am. They don't have a level of passion. And it's like, get off the dime, right? Let's move. Let's get it done. Highly driven people have a hard time understanding people that are not driven,
So when you're a founder, how have you kind of created the organization such that you create the environment for people to learn and also to grow, such that they do become.
How do you pass the passion for learning, for growing? This is I think the Arthur's question is like, you have the passion and you just want things to get better and better, and there comes someone who says, okay, 9 to 5 time start.
So true. Yeah, so true. And there's a movement now called quietly quitting. Have you heard about that?
Yes.
It's just like, whoa, what's that about? So, yeah, I totally understand the frustration of that. And there are two parts that I'd like to mention. One is I had to work on myself. And one of the skills that I learned, and I'm sorry I can't think of the individual's name, but I will in a minute. But it's procrastination on purpose. And being a high driver, I tend not to procrastinate a lot as my nature. But I've learned that if I procrastinate on purpose and just take a step back and evaluate time, effort, and what I get out of it. So if I'm in that situation where I just soon do it myself, it gets done quicker. How much time does it take me to do that? Or how much time does it take me to spend with that person to see what truly motivates them, what inspires them, find out what they feel they can contribute to their role, and then help them expand that. It takes more time, but in the end, what have I created? So that's the gift of procrastinating on purpose. So I'm too busy driving to notice what is needed by the people around me as far as their own level of self-confidence and self-efficacy in their role and their appreciation. They're being appreciated. Are they being appreciated? And spending that time with them. You find that if you give them time and a little bit of yourself, even though it took an hour instead of 10 minutes, like normally it would for you, that means so much more for that individual. And then you create a culture. So that is something I've learned through the hard way. Because if I'm a driver, I drive people around me, they should get it done, right?
So looks, Marian, like I will have to take a step back and find out what really motivates you. And, we'll have to have a discussion afterwards.
Good luck with that.
Susan, we also, I remember that in the previous discussions that we had with you, you mentioned new technologies and how you're pioneering Meta and education it has a big opportunity to use those modern technologies. Can you kind of shed light on this and how you see the role of modern technologies in educating people?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, there's a resistance in traditional education, especially in the K through 12 classroom, for implementing technology on a daily basis. Kids have their cell phones. Get rid of your cell phones. We're not doing cell phones. I say use the technology. Put that to good use because they're already getting excited about whatever it is, social media or whatever they're on. So turn it around. Implement the tool in their hand into the classroom, understand it, and implement it for a learning opportunity. So then you create this atmosphere of friendliness. Now that's in the early stages. We're way beyond that. 5.5 years ago, after having done some travel around the world to see, I actually taught in other countries just to learn how education was done in other countries, what the world needs as far as education advancement and how we can do it better and how I could be a better instructor. I learned so much. I came back with this vision and I had no idea that it took a pandemic to accelerate it. And now it's beyond introductory stages. We already have early adapters. We have people that are moving into the world of technology delivery in ways and fashions that have been beyond our imagination. So I'm engaged locally with what we call microschooling, and there's a lot of focus on the failure of our formal educational environment in the K through 12 environment, as demonstrated during the pandemic. Everyone was at a loss. Many people were at a loss, but those who had used technology consistently and had seen the growth from the early, higher education environments that were strictly online to the marriage, to the hybrid, to the universities that are now trying to catch up really quickly in the world of technology and education delivery. So those of us who had that skill were on board really quickly to help people move up the ladder. But what we're doing now is we're creating an environment where all this technology and all the access that we have to internet and all this knowledge, there's really no filter. There's a lot of white noise. There's a lot of advertisement. There's a lot of junk that, unless you're really keen, you can be misinformed, all of the things that we can imagine. So we've developed a platform to where we work in what we call topic pods. And we've created this beautiful environment that is eco-friendly to all learners without the white noise. And then we make that accessible to educators. And so this is called a developing process, and micro schools are part of this creative. Harvard introduced the concept, but it's where parents, educators get together and create their own educational ecosystem, their own environment. And so the micro schooling concept is now platforming on, I've partnered with an organization called Jotical, and we create learning pods called JOTS. So if you're a Trekkie or a Star Wars fan, you can look back into some of the filming and how when we think of Dr. Spock's school in his elementary school, what did that look like? And there's some film B-roll that I use when I introduce the concept. So if you have access to nothing but pure knowledge on different topics, you can begin to see the relationship between the different areas and disciplines. For instance, if we're working on a biotechnology issue and how that relates to social policy, right away you see the connection because you're in a pure learning environment. I don't want to over express it, but go ahead.
Does it kind of blur the boundaries between different topics and merge it into a more coherent whole? Because this is something that I've seen in business kind of environment as well, and it looked really interesting. Where I had some of the team members in my team in one of the previous jobs where they wanted to solve a problem. So they thought, okay, I need to go for a programming course, I need to go for a risk management course, I need to go for this, and if they were given a curriculum which was directed not at individual disciplines where they really
Correct.
need 10% from each one, but something that is more reality and life oriented, then they would fare much better and probably use their time much more. So it looks like it's. Do I understand the concept correctly?
Archer, you're exactly right. That's at the higher level. I mean, they're starting that in the K through 12 system, creating this ecosystem of education that applies to that, not for the driving for the industry of education, but driving for the problem at hand, we'll say. And so when you translate that to, businesses and higher education, what does that look like? And so that's what we're creating. We're one of the few people that have come to the table with these concepts and are diving in excitedly about how to then excel this into the metaverse universe, University of Metaverse, which will evolve eventually. Right now, it's at its elemental stages, and there's lots of gamification in that world, and they want now to invite educators that are early adapters to this concept and how education can be really focused And who drives that education? It's not a system that defines an educational pathway. It's the individual and the entrepreneur educators who are now specialists in areas that can contribute and teach what they love to teach and not what they have to teach to satisfy a system. So that's part of the driver too. So it's twofold. So it's the educators as well as the individual learning community that's driving it.
I know it's been discussed in many places many times, but what are because you put now a strong border between what people want to teach and what they have to teach because of the education system. Like, what's the biggest pitfall of current system? I've heard that it was designed to train workers in factories, and all this system of sitting down with hands on the table for 6 hours is actually preparing you to work on the shop floor of the factory. Is it the biggest, let's say, problem with the current education system, or is there something else?
Well, it's certainly been what's made countries great. America, United States of America, is great because in part because of their education system. Yes, it was a response to the Industrial Revolution. And yes, the coursework and the directions were defined accordingly, expanded accordingly, and there were benefits from that. And it certainly prepared individuals for various aspects of the Industrial Revolution. It's a total different picture now. So are we still trying to educate in the same way? It's a revolution now. It's an information revolution. It's an evolution of revolution. So it's how do we need to approach it much differently? And it's very hard to swing a huge infrastructure. There's a lot of money behind huge universities and our academic system, and it has a value, and our accreditation systems, they've had a value. How do they adapt and switch to the new concepts of learning? And it's going to be some hard lessons for some organizations, yes, but it's going to happen. It's just a matter of who and how people adapt to it. So I'm an educator. I've been an educator. Even when I was in business marketing and management, I taught on the side. It's just habitual with me. I started in the second grade. I was one of those kids that was couldn't get enough information and pretty hyper. And so they didn't know what to do with me. And I was a girl because, a girl that loves math, science, biology. I was working in 8th grade level in grade 2. It was, wow, scary back in the day. So they would put me in the corner and have me teach the rest of the kids who were like, struggling with English, math, or science, And so I got to be the teacher. And so it's embedded in my psyche. I can't help it.
Which is actually pretty interesting, because I'm not sure if it's actually very related to our topic, but you wanted to be a teacher, you had this drive, and when you ask kids today, who do you want to be? It's like, I want to be a manager of sales or something like. Very rarely you can hear kids wanting to be a doctor. Like the idea of a profession is dying out a little. I fear. It relates to what you said, listening to your ego, listening to growing into something. It's hard to become a better person without this backbone of being someone. It's like you're a cog. You just turn left, and in the next position you will turn right, or you will just fill your Excels. It's hardly satisfying, I think.
I agree. Yeah, I think to your point, the vision of young people now, what do you want to be? Even if that is what they choose, it's human nature to look for someone who has done it well and to emulate it or imitate it. So they're really looking for a teacher. They just don't have the words. So, teaching will never go away, by the way. You gentlemen teach every day when you talk to your audience, and you're informing them and you're facilitating. And so it's a natural process of being a human being, is learning from how other people did it well and how you can match that or do it better. So I think that if we appreciate that and kind of move that into a space where it's facilitated and acknowledged consciously, then I think no matter what an individual chooses or dreams of being, it can enhance their own life. So I'm not opposed. I mean, because I'm a teacher and I'm an educator at the highest level in my profession, it's not the end all be all. I know a lot of people that are better dancers than learners of education. And, it's just whatever their individual makeup is. And that's many different things. So we got a little bit off track, but my heart goes out to your point is, who are people looking up to now? Who are young people looking to for role models and, information and heroes?
Absolutely, and I always tell my kids that probably the job that they will have in in their adulthood hasn't been invented yet, because the world changes so much that we don't probably have the words yet to describe what they will be doing. But being a risk guy, I wanted to kind of steer the conversation a bit towards risk, but not in the kind of, because traditionally when people talk about modern technology and kids and educating, they go into the risks of cyber world and all this. But I wanted to go into a slightly different direction, and that is the perception of risk in the world, and how people kind of educating people enables them to better perceive risks in the operations, better perceive the risks in their life, in their business, and how do you bring that critical thinking mindset? Because going back to Dr. Nick Swain's students and their ability to troubleshoot, I think that also is a derivative of risk perception, because knowing where the problems are is a kind of problem detection, and whether you detect them as after they happen and you troubleshoot, or whether you have the ability to almost think ahead. These are slightly two different things. So, do you think there's a way we can steer education in such a way that people build that critical thinking and foresight?
Well, there definitely is, and it's not something that it's something that has to be done age appropriate or education level appropriate. It's not a skill that you can just throw the high level concepts right at every individual and they're going to get it. It's a matter of integration and understanding how to apply themselves to the levels of how to mitigate risk once it's been visible or uncovered, or how to anticipate potential risk and to measure the direction you need to go to avoid extemporaneous risk that is going to, destroy your company or whatever. I mean, I don't want to go too far down that bunny hole, but it's a process of being able to think so many steps ahead. And Archer, you're exactly right. And that takes an integration of knowledge about a company and its culture and your product and your service or the world at large. And so that's where you take in a lot of data and then do an analysis as to where those risks may lie along the way. So you have to think as many as 9 steps ahead. And that's not unrealistic to imagine, because what decision you make today can affect you 9 different times along the pathway till it becomes resolved or improved or whatever. So that is a skill. That is a skill you learn in, particularly in the levels of research that, I'm teaching in that field. So definitely, because I'll have someone, they'll come to me with a design question, and the answer at first is, it depends. And they're very frustrated with that response, but I'll say, this is why. And so then I'll walk them through the steps ahead. And even though they say, I wish someone had told me this earlier. Well, they did, but you weren't prepared to hear it because you didn't know what you didn't know. And therefore, now you can understand why that person explained it to you in that way, because they're already thinking 9, 10 steps ahead. And they're educating you on that process. So going through that process, you learn the value of that. And to know what you don't know is often the key, right? So how do you think ahead? And it's an art form, it's a discipline, and it's something you have to teach. It doesn't come natural for a lot of people. You have to teach them that brain exercise. And so if you're a company and you want to teach your problem solvers how to go through those steps, you have to be ahead of them 9 steps, basically.
I once heard someone say that good risk management teachers are a bit like dentists, because when dentists they recommend the better toothpaste, at some point they will devise a toothpaste that's so good that will no longer need dentists. And risk managers, if they are good at what they do and they really can instill this risk management mindset, at some point you will not need them anymore, because people in the company should be able to themselves think critically and prepare the risk analysis. So maybe I'm kind of teaching myself out of a job, but For me, it would be an ideal world where if people did have that critical faculty that allowed them to plan 9 steps ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. And it takes time. You can't do it in a day.
Speaking of time.
I think it's all we have time for. And as we always say, let's hope it was of use to someone.
Thank you for listening.
For a slightly different take on knowledge transfer, check out the podcast Speaking of Reliability, where Carl and Fred discuss good knowledge transfer in their July 22 episode. As usual, all links to the references will be available in the notes to this episode.
Also, don't miss the next one, where we'll be discussing agile methodologies, their supposed universality, and some actual limitations.
Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or visit bdr.show to find out more about the future episodes and guests. You can also check out cognition.llc for more information on Cognition Shared Solutions, our services, and other events hosted by us.
For now, it's thank you from myself, your friendly neighborhood data guy, Dr. Marian Siwiak, and my co-host, Artur Buja.
Thank you very much.